Okay, so I just wanted to do a quick review of units 3 and 4. There's, as you know, been some things going on that potentially you need to get caught up on these. Most of you, I believe, have Unit 3, but Unit 3 is really built from when we start doing Unit 4. So I just wanted to go over some of the key concepts of Units 3 and 4, as well as just to kind of show that the helpful videos on Canvas from Anthony are very helpful. But they are kind of along the way. And so after we forked the repo, we actually are inheriting a lot of settings that he goes over in that. And so that's why, like in previous weeks, when we were doing collisions and our character was falling through our collision boxes, it was because we already had our layers that we inherited from forking the repo. Whereas in the helpful video, he hadn't set up the layers yet, so everything was on default and it was fine. So there's just some little things like that that I just wanted to make sure, try to clear up any confusion on any of that. So right now, I've kind of undid a couple things here. I'm gonna hit play. And right now, I have my wooden platforms. When I go onto them, they drop. The other one has the key on there. Sorry, my character does switch on the arrow keys there. This one does not, and then that one has the key, but the key and the chest are from Unit 4, so we'll come back to that. But this one, I got rid of the rigid body and everything, so this wooden platform doesn't fall. I wanted to remake that just on camera here, so I'll go ahead and hit stop there. So I have that box selected. I've removed all the components that are new to the rigid body and the physics and having it fall and on a trigger and everything. So you should have on all of your game objects some sort of sprite, most likely. Maybe not all of them, but most likely you have that sprite render. And then if you wanted it to be part of like your floor that you can run on it or whatever, you have a box collider. You do want to make sure that anything that's part of your level has the level layer. So like, I believe actually in class when I was setting up the spiky ball, I forgot to set it to level, and I was trying to troubleshoot why the particles weren't working anymore, and I was looking at like the emission and stuff in the particle system there. And one of you in class actually said, hey, I think just double check your layer, and that was actually the issue. So just double check that stuff. Anything that's part of the level, make sure that's level. Your character, make sure that's player. And then when we get to the chest and the key, those will be power-ups or maybe power-downs, depending on what they do. But we'll go over all that in just a little bit here. I'm going to go back to this box, and I just want to add a component again. I'm going to go ahead and add the box collider, and I'll make sure that this one is a trigger. I want this one to be kind of up in the air a little ways, and then I want it to be pretty small, actually, so maybe like 0.1 by 0.1 by 0.1. Something like that. Maybe that's a little too high up in the air. Maybe like 0.2 is better. 0.15. I kind of like 0.2. So I'll go with that. Okay. So the collision box that's actually around the box that matches it very well is what the character is going to run on. That one is not set to be a trigger. By making this one a trigger, it basically makes it a trigger box, or a box that when I overlap with, I can tell it to do something else. In this case, when the player overlaps with it, or really when anything that can trigger that overlaps with it, the character can do that out of the box here. It will trigger some sort of event. The event or the function that we're going to have it trigger is going to be to enable the physics so that this thing falls and is affected by gravity. So in order for it to actually have the physics and the rigid body, we need to add that. I'll go add component. I will look for rigid body. Again, everything we're doing is the regular ones, not the 2D ones. So we'll add that. Okay. And then here, I'll be honest, in the actual unit, it says to use the simple trigger event behavior. I could get that to work until the halfway point. I could get it to, if I hit play right now, the box should fall, which is great, but I want it to fall only when I trigger it. So if I did that simple trigger event behavior, I could tell it on awake to not have physics, but then when I would hit play after having it turn on the physics on trigger, it would just turn it on every time I hit play. So I found instead of using the simple one, I just used the regular one. trigger events behavior, which has a little bit more to it, but it was working better in my opinion. So if that's where you're kind of hung up on, I recommend using just the regular trigger events behavior script. And again, the only difference here is that it has awake, start, trigger, trigger, enter, repeat, trigger, enter, end, exit. It just has a few more things, but it should behave the same way. In fact, in my case, it was working a lot better. So on this first one, awake is basically when the thing spawns in the level, or since it's there right now, when we hit play. So when that object is awake, I'll go ahead and actually add the object. So I'll click add right there, drag my box over into the object. And so when that is awake, I just want to go into the rigid body and say sleep. Doesn't that sound nice? When you wake up, you can just go back to sleep. Get caught up on some sleep, right? And then on the trigger enter event, actually, let's hit play first and just see. So you saw it fall before. Now I'm telling it, hey, don't have the rigid body yet. So now it's not falling, okay? So that's what that's doing. So on the trigger enter event, when the character or something else that can trigger this enters that collision box, that trigger, we want something there. I'll drag the box back in. And then here, I'll go to the rigid body and I'll say wake up. Now, just because I'm dragging in that same box doesn't mean you always have to drag in the same object. If when this particular box is triggered, you want it to do something else on some other object, you can totally do that. So like if you have some sort of object that's currently hidden or not enabled or something, when you trigger this particular trigger box, this particular object has a triggerable sub-object, right? Component. When you trigger that, you can have it do something to some other object. I could drag anything over here, like spiky ball. I could click and drag the spiky ball over here and say when that box is activated, that I could like turn off my object, my spiky ball here. Or I could turn the sprite on and off, or change the sprite, or actually do the particles there, right? So just because I am doing everything right now with this box does not mean I'm limited to only doing things on the box in these objects. But for now, just to get the actual assignment there, I will do the box, and I will do the rigid body, and I will do wake up. So now if I hit play, we know what it's supposed to do because I had that one working already. So I'll come over here to this one, and now it's working. So it's the same idea here for the spiky ball. I don't have a collider on it to like have me be able to walk on the spiky ball. I just kind of pass through it. So I just have the one collision on there that's a trigger. And then I just have it spawning those particles. So to take a look at that one really quick, I just have, sorry, this little menu's kind of not really in the way, but that's just the particles. I have the sprite render, it's the spiked ball. I have just one box collider. This one is the trigger. I have the particle system. All of this I think was pretty much the same other than the start size. I made it much, much, much smaller. And then I just turned the emission off. The shape, I also made the radius a lot smaller, so it was closer to the actual radius of the object itself. So look into that at least. But the emission I just turned off. And then on the trigger events behavior script, because it was already off, I didn't have to worry about anything on the start. And then when I go into the spiky balls trigger component, I have it doing the function particle system emit. And that has like a parentheses int at the end, integer. You can just type in an integer here. So when I overlap with it, it fires off 20 particles. So that's a brief review of Unit 3. We'll jump into the stuff for Unit 4 shortly. Okay, so I'm back in here. I just went through and deleted all the components on the key and the chest there. So they're just the art. This is in the key and chest art folder. These are actually assets from the asset store. So there's a link on the actual assignment page for Unit 4. Just go into that assignment, scroll down to the bottom, and there should be the links to the Unity asset store. just make sure that you're logged into your account on the Unity Asset Store, and then just make sure those are added to your account so that you're using them legally. They are free. It's just technically because we cloned the repo or forked the repo that had these originally. We just don't technically have the license to actually use these, but they're free. So you just go ahead and add them to your account and then just say open in Unity. You might be prompted to download them, but Unity will actually just sit there for like a split second trying to download it and then realize you already have them and then say you're all good. So that's where these came from. Again, you already have them in the project. You just might want to do that extra step of just making sure that these are actually linked to your account so that you're using them legally, right? So I have the wooden chest. I have the key. And let's do the key first. I think that's a little easiest or a little easier to do it that way. So I'll go ahead and add a component. And I need just a box collider on it. And I think the default size there is probably good. But this is just an object. It's probably fine for me to just overlap with it. I don't think I'm going to be able to like land on the key without collecting it. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this one a trigger. That should be fine. Okay, and then I'm also going to, I'll add the little trigger event here. Trigger events behavior. Because I believe in the helpful video, in the trigger enter event, we do this. So we just add a little function there. I'll drag the key in. And then I can go to, again, any of these things, it's just inheriting from all the components that are on it. So I can go into like the sprite renderer, and I can look for bool enabled. So this is going to enable or disable. It's basically true or false. Is it enabled or not? That's what the bool is, a boolean. Enabled, but only the sprite itself, not the object, but the sprite. So this will basically turn the visibility on and off, right? So right now it's visible, and then when I collect it, that is unchecked. So it should just turn off. So we can go test that out. So there you go, it turned off. So it looked like I collected it, but it's not really doing anything other than just turning invisible, right? So you could have it that way. One thing that I actually thought was kind of fun was to leave the visibility on after we got this next part done, just because it kind of looks like the character's actually carrying the key, which is kind of fun. But it's up to you. That may be a creative, unique twist that you put on it. But this next one, I'm going to go ahead and do add component again. And I need to look for the word attach. Now, this is one where I thought maybe the unit was a little confusing because it does say attach to parent, but then in the text next to the name of the script, it says attach on trigger. So you could try either of these. I did attach on trigger, and that seemed to work. Attach to parent has just like the option to actually tell it like what exactly to attach to, or define the parent, or change it at any time. I think it just has another extra, parent ID. It just has the little extra thing there. But I found it easiest for what we're doing to just do attach on trigger, which means attach to the thing that triggered the trigger box, right? So now if I check this box to keep it visible on my sprite renderer enabled or not enabled, I'm now just keeping it visible there. That's now true. It should be true that it's visible. Now when I collect it, you can actually see this thing stick to me. And again, I kind of liked this. I thought it was fun that it kind of looked like I was carrying the key. It's not rotating with me, but that's okay. I kind of liked that. So like I said, maybe that's something, a little bit creative twist that you could add onto yours. But I'll go ahead and just turn mine off. You could see that the key was attaching to me, which is good. So I can make it invisible when I collect it, and then I'm actually physically carrying it around. The other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that that only this key can open this chest, or really anything that has the ID key can open or interact with anything else that has the ID that matches, right? Or can match that ID. So there's these things. They're a lot like tags. I mean, it has tags up here. But we can actually assign some sort of identification to certain objects. And this is where we kind of get into setting up those layers. It's already set to power up. So when I added it in, I set it to power ups there. So make sure you do that. Again, that's in the helpful video, that's in the text. A little bit more on layers really quick. If I go here, you can actually add a layer. And you can see, just like in Anthony's video, you can see the layers that he added. They're already added for you. That was why our character was falling through platforms and stuff, was we were already dealing with some of that stuff. And then he also went through, I guess while I'm talking about it, he also went through, if you go up to edit and then project settings, I believe, it's under, oh look, it took me right to it because I was looking at it, probably the last thing I was in here. If you go down to, like, you'll probably be somewhere in here, I don't know, one of the other menus. If you go down to physics, you might have to expand that into settings. And then you might only see like the gravity stuff here, or maybe game objects or something. Make sure you're on shared. Right underneath gravity, if you go to layer collision matrix and click on the arrow, you can see that matrix that was also set up in the video. So if you want certain things to actually interact with other things that aren't set in here, you could do that. That could be part of your creative twist, your unique twist. You could do some different things. But this is already all set up. We kind of inherited those settings from the repo that we forked. So again, that's, I think, where a little bit of the confusion has been coming from over the last few weeks, was that initially everything was on the default layer and everything was just colliding like normal. But we had all these layers set up, which is why we had to change our level objects to level and our player object to player. And now we have to make sure we have power ups and potentially power downs and things, right? So that's what's going on there. If you want to take a look at that stuff, change any of it, add new layers to anything. I'm not sure what you would want to add, but that could be something you could add now that you know how to do it. And now you know how that's all set up. So anyways, back to what we were doing. So yeah, make sure you have the layer there power-ups, the layer there power-ups. Again, this one's all blank. It's just the sprite, and I did change that layer there. The key has that box collider, has the trigger event. We're just turning the visibility off. And then we're also saying attach to whatever it was that triggered it. And this character already has the ability to trigger that, so it attaches to that. The last thing I need to do on this is I need to add an ID. And there are a few in here. There's a simple ID behavior, and then there's ID behavior. Let me click on the regular one. Let's compare it to the other one here. So if I just go down to simple ID behavior, that's the one you want. That other one had like a, on start, you could probably switch it or assign it. It just had that extra layer. This one is going to be good enough for now. Let's go ahead and do this one. And anything that we're going to add, you can always find it in the asset browser. So if you just go over here to the root folder assets, that's every other folder and subfolder and asset that's in there. And if I just search for key, you'll get a whole bunch of stuff. Like you'll get all the key sprites that we have. But you'll also get this object right here. This is actually an ID. And it's just called key. So if you can't find it any other way, you can always find it here. And then on the actual key itself, you can just drag that into the ID here. I also found that whenever I clicked this button here, it was the only one that came up. So if that's the case for you, that might be the easiest way to find it, is to just click the little tiny circle button here on the right of the ID, and it comes up. If you have the whole list here, you could probably search for key in the search there. And if you just can't find it that way, you can always search for it here, find the one that has the blue cube with the red brackets, and drag and drop that in. Okay. So now I can show you what this is doing. Let me actually switch my layout here. I'll go to the 2x3 really quick. And I'll kind of zoom in here so that you can see when I'm playing it, the key disappears, but you can actually see it should be attaching the object to my character. So I'll go and collect it. There it goes. I had to get a little closer to it. So in my game view, it looks like nothing's there anymore, but I've collected the key. And then in my editor view, I can actually see that that object is attached to me. So now the idea is I'm going to bring that object over to the chest. And when the chest and the key overlap with each other, the chest will do something, right? So to do that, let me go back to kind of the default layout, because I think that's a little easier to see in class and in these videos a little bit. So the key is done. Now it's time for the chest. I just have this chest in here. I just picked one of the sprites from the assets here. The key and chest. Somewhere in here. I guess you could just search for chest, right? That's probably much faster. I just picked one of these, one of the closed ones. You do notice that it has a negative scale. So when I brought it in, it was initially like that. I just didn't like that it looked like it was facing kind of the edge there. So I just made it -1 so that it would kind of face the direction I wanted. That's really all that's doing. I also have my order in layer at -1. If you ever have your character, when you hit play here, and your character is like behind objects that you don't want them to be behind, that is most likely your order in layer on your sprite. It might be 0 or 1, and if you want it to be in the background, you got to do a minus number. So -1 is usually good enough, but sometimes you got to push it even further in the back. But I'll do -1 there. And now when I hit play, you should see that I actually go in front of the chest, which is good. I need to add a few things to this. So let's go ahead and add our box collider to it. So I just had collider searched there. We'll add that box collider. Now, if I hit play right now with the box collider, I actually land on it. And that's just because we have the layer set up there. So always remember to double check your layers. The key and the chest right now are power-ups. Okay, so that's good, but I actually want this to be able to trigger certain things. I need this in order to actually read the ID matching and stuff and see, oh, does this thing have the ID key? If it does, okay, we'll go ahead and open the chest or swap the chest out for some fruit or something that you collect or whatever it is, right? So I need to make sure this is a trigger box, so I'll click is trigger. Okay, and then in order to actually properly read if the key has the correct ID, if something has the right ID, I actually need to give this a rigid body. Yes, this rigid body does have like the physics in it, so it uses gravity. So like that's why when we walk on these platforms, in my case, the platforms fall. But it also gives me the ability to use is kinematic here. And what this does is it kind of just opens up a few more options for us. In particular, in this case, it gives us the ability to do the ID matching, which is pretty good. But the reason why like the character already has a lot of the ability to do these things is because this capsule is part of the character controller, and that already has the rigid body and the kinematic library and stuff all enabled. So that's why the character has been able to do a lot of these things. We're essentially setting up this wooden chest to do the things that we want to do. And in order to do that, we have that rigid body with the is kinematic option checked there, okay? Now, you could do something on the trigger. So we do have that simple trigger ID, or excuse me, trigger behavior script. And that's fine, but we really only want this thing to trigger and fire off a certain other event or function when it's the key. And the key we know, because we just set it up, has that ID, right? So instead, let's go ahead and do add component, and we will look for ID again. And in fact, we'll look for ID match. And there's a few of them. There's simple match ID, simple ID match behavior, and the match ID behavior. Probably any of them would work. I believe in the others, in the one section, I used simple ID match behavior. And yeah, that looks good enough to me. So it has an ID here. Right now it says none. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And I have key right there. Again, if you don't see that, you could try searching up here. Or you can try searching for key in the asset browser here and actually drag and drop that to set it, okay? Just make sure it's that same ID. It should be key. Make sure you have the ID set on the key and now that ID set right here on the chest, okay? So again, we're not necessarily assigning the key ID to the chest. We're just telling the chest, hey, look for anything that has the ID of the key. And when that certain thing triggers this, that particular match, if it's a match and it's triggering, let's go ahead and do something with that. So on the match event, let's go ahead and add something that it can do. I'll go ahead and drag my chest out to the object. And then what I'm going to do I believe in the helpful video, it kind of just stopped here, sort of. I mean, it might have showed that like the chest was disappearing or something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my sprite renderer here, and I'm going to look for where it says sprite. And essentially this is saying, hey, on the sprite thing, let's change the sprite setting. So that's why it says it twice. Some of these you can actually see, hey, the string name, let's change the string, let's change the name. So the string is text, it's a fancy programming term for text, a string of letters, and let's change the name that is the string, or the material, right? Or the bool enabled, is it true or false that it's enabled, right? So, but that's why that's listed there twice, sprite. And then the sprite I actually want to do here, let me search for chest in here. I think it's a little easier to see it all in here. I used, it looks like this chest. So I'm going to do the one that's the most open there, okay? And I will drag that in, there we go. I will just click and drag that in to my sprite render.sprite option here where it says none. Okay, now it is facing the wrong way, but because I set the scale up here, this should apply to everything else underneath, okay? So now there's one more thing, but again, we are kind of inheriting a lot of the things that Anthony set up in the video, just because after he did it, he then pushed and committed all of his changes to the repo, and so when we forked the repo, we have a lot of like the layers being set up already with the layer matrix. If you look at the key, the match behavior, so we can also just look at the script in here, or not the ID. We want the simple ID match behavior. Where is that one? And you had to add a certain line to it, but we already have all that stuff added. So if you ever want to look at these scripts, you can look at what the script is doing here. We're going to do a little bit more of that shortly. But if you ever want to look at how these are working or change anything about them, you can always take a look there. You can open it. I think the default, like I said, is to open it in Visual Studio. There might be a slight issue with that if you don't have Visual Studio and GitHub connected, but you can always change what program actually opens up the script. But for now, let's just go ahead and test this out. Let me just go back to my assets there, and I'll click on my chest just as a review. I have my sprite renderer. I have my box collider is a trigger. I have my rigid body with kinematics, so I can do all the fancy stuff we're doing. And then I'm just saying, hey, when something triggers this that has the ID of key, let's go ahead and just open the chest, okay? So I'm gonna hit play. So again, just as a review, I do have my boxes that fall. We set this one up together just as a good review. I'll grab my key, and I'll walk over, and when I overlap with the chest there, actually when the key overlaps with the chest, it's gonna say, yep, you have the right ID, so I'll go ahead and open up. And that's really all you need for Unit 4. So again, I think most of the confusion had been from just the fact that we already are inheriting a lot of the settings that were set in the videos. So there's a little bit of extra stuff. It is really good to watch that and see how that all is set up. But if you're just wanting to make sure that yours is working, you can just jump straight in. I didn't change any of those settings. I showed you where those settings are. But if you just want to jump straight in after you're aware of the layers being set up and that power-ups and players and other power-ups can all kind of interact with each other, you can either follow along with me or follow along with the rest of the helpful videos there. But I did have a number of questions on Unit 3 and Unit 4, and since they kind of built from each other, a lot of those concepts from Unit 3 carry over to Unit 4, I thought I would make this video. And like I said, somebody had a question on like, hey, if I open the chest, how can I have a new item spawn there? And I said, well, you could put the item there, like it was a fruit, I think they wanted to do. You could put the fruit there and then just make sure that the object itself, so instead of the sprite, you could actually do the object itself. So like on the key, I'm turning the sprite invisible. You can actually do the game object, and you can say set active and have it be inactive or active. And so after you trigger the chest, you could turn the chest off and then activate your fruit and then collect your fruit or something, right? So you can do other objects in there and get a little more fancy here. But just those kinds of concepts of having your object here, whatever your function is, and then doing it on the certain triggers, whether that's a trigger with an ID or a trigger when you overlap with a trigger box or something. So again, hopefully that helps. Hopefully this gets everybody mostly caught up, and we'll continue from here.